All right, so shall we get started?
Yes, thank you, Charles.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, honourable members of Parliament, distinguished staffers of the institution, and of course our hosts for today's event, jointly the Executive Secretary of the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, and the Secretary General of the Inter-Parliamentary Union. My name is Charles Chauvel. I'm a former member of the Parliament of New Zealand. I sat in the House of Representatives there for some 7 years. After that, I came to work for the United Nations Development Programme, supporting our country programming in about 60 parliaments across the world, particularly in the area of SDG monitoring and achievement. And so it's a real delight and an honour for me to have been asked by the co-conveners of this event to facilitate today. Just to perhaps give you a rundown of the way the event will proceed. First of all, we will hear from an expert, a regional advisor on official statistics on the 2030 agenda from the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific. That's Mr. Jan Smit. He works with national statistical offices and other entities comprising national statistical systems in Asia and the Pacific to strengthen their capacity to produce data and statistics for the Sustainable Development Goals. He's an economist by training. He earlier held positions at ESCAP in statistics development and program management. Once we've heard from Mr. Smit in his scene-setting presentation, and of course, we'll all know as parliamentarians, ex-parliamentarians, those who support parliamentarians, just how important statistics are in terms of evidence-based argument for allocation of resources to better achieve development goals. It's really, I think, going to be a very good and powerful way to set the scene for our initial discussion. After we've heard the expert presentation, I will then open the floor to participants in the seminar for a discussion. We have limited time, so what I'm going to ask honourable members and staff to try to do is limit their remarks to 2 minutes. I know that's a very tough call, but I think it will be necessary if we're going to give everybody an opportunity to speak. But before calling on our expert, I'm honoured to ask our co-hosts to say a few words of introduction. Do we have the Executive Secretary online?
Yes, I'm here, Charles.
Konebu, it's an honour to have you here. Let me introduce you to the MPs in attendance, although I'm sure you need no introduction to most of them. We're very, very grateful to have one of the most senior figures in the United Nations hosting or co-hosting today. Armida, if I may, is the Executive Secretary, as I said, of the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, and an Under-Secretary General of the United Nations. We really are delighted to have you gracing our presence today by way of introduction. May I invite you to say a few words, followed by the Secretary General of the IPU. Thank you, Kun Ibu.
Okay, Thank you very much, Charles. Honorable members of Parliament, my colleague, Mr. Martin Chungong from the International Parliamentary Union, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to welcome you to this webinar. As you know, the Asia-Pacific has witnessed remarkable transformation over the past decades. People are much more well off than 15 years ago, and yet many challenges remain, such as inequality, unemployment, including youth unemployment, are rising, especially due to the pandemic, as well as catastrophic environmental change is also a big challenge for our region. The onset of COVID-19 pandemic has further reversed the hard-won sustainable development gains in our region. This morning, we just launched our Asia-Pacific SDG Progress Report 2021, highlighting that the region is not on track to achieve SDG in the next decade, so by 2030. So, and then the COVID-19 pandemic has indeed changed the socio-economic landscape and political aspiration of our region, presenting new opportunities to recover better together. The pandemic and associated outcomes clearly show us the importance of investing in inclusion, resilience, and sustainability. The 2030 Agenda is our compass that will lead us through the post-COVID-19 recovery path. Please allow me to share 3 key messages for your further consideration and deliberations. First, let us focus on inclusion. There is a clear need to broaden the scope and scale of healthcare provisions to safeguard lives and livelihoods of people in the region. And with large number of informal sector workers, government must also work towards providing adequate social protection for all. Second, we must build resilience to overcome systemic weaknesses across the institutional architecture at the local level of governance. Multi-stakeholder approach is needed to enhance resilience against future pandemics and shocks and crises. Resilience needs to be part of recovery through better management of economic recovery, including trade, supply chain, connectivity, as well as the digital or accelerate this digitalization. Third, let us ensure sustainability in all aspects of policy making. Governments need to go beyond business as usual scenario to the recovery plan. A concerted effort by all stakeholders should incorporate climate action, including energy transition policy measures in an integrated, holistic, and cost-effective manner. I'm confident that well-coordinated national plan provide opportunities to contribute to safeguarding the SDGs. By leveraging sustainable financing instruments, new and emerging technology, resource-efficient energy system, nature-based solution, parliamentarians can bring long-lasting development changes in the societies and communities. I recognize that through your oversight, legislative function, and adoption of people-centered budgetary allocations, parliaments are the real agents of change in recovering better together. I would like to reiterate that this goal 16 of SDGs aims to promote strong, transparent, accountable institutions, such as parliaments, which is key in fulfilling the 2030 Agenda. In view of this, it's very encouraging to see several parliaments formally positioning themselves with respect to SDGs. Your engagement with the VNR, Voluntary National Review Process, is clear testimony of your commitment. As we chart out the sustainable pathways out of this global pandemic, I count on your continued engagement and response to accelerate the social and economic transformation needed to achieve SDG by 2030. We call on your strategic involvement and leadership successfully building a better future where nobody is left behind. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you so much, Under Secretary General, for those comments. And may I just add that as somebody who's now been in Bangkok in post for 2 years, it's been a real privilege to see how you've led the Commission in a way that not only takes SDG attainment so seriously at the national level, but doesn't ignore the contribution of parliaments. You know, so often in the UN and multilateral system, everybody concentrates on what the executive branch of the government can do. And it's been really wonderful to see how ESCAP under your leadership has also embraced the parliamentary aspect, civil society, judicial work, and the contribution of the private sector as all vital partners to embrace and attain the 2030 agenda. So I hope you don't mind me just mentioning that to everybody, because I think it is just so important as an example for the way forward. Without further ado, I'd now like to call on a representative of our co-host, the Inter-Parliamentary Union, my friend and longtime colleague, Martin Chungong. I say longtime colleague because we even have some shared UNDP history together, as Martin often likes to remind me. Martin, if we may now hear from you and the important words that you will have to contribute on just how this event will fit into the wider plan on ensuring that there's a strong parliamentary contribution to the 2030 agenda and the SDGs in particular. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charles. Great to see you. I see that you're keeping well under the circumstances. And dear Amida, it's a pleasure to see you. And it was heartwarming to hear those very nice words from Charles regarding your leadership. I do know, and I'm now familiar with your leadership in respect of engaging parliaments in global processes such as the SDGs, and you can count on us to continue to work together with you, Amida, and your colleagues in Bangkok to make sure that parliaments are a centerpiece of the SDG architecture. It gives me great pleasure, therefore, to be here today to welcome all participants, members of parliament. I know that their presence in this meeting is testimony to their dedication to this important cause of implementing the SDGs in an accelerated fashion. I have heard what you had to say, Amida, regarding the fact that no country in your region is on track to achieve the SDGs by 2030. This leads me to call out parliaments to be more robust in their contribution to the implementation of the SDGs. And when I say this, when I call to action, it is not because I think that parliaments should be doing something different from what their constitutional mandate is. I am simply appealing to parliaments to use their constitutional powers of lawmaking, holding government to account, overseeing government, and providing the necessary resources, because all of this are enshrined in the constitutional framework of every country. And we want them to display that political will and use the tools that they already have in order to make a difference and impact, in this particular instance, working to implement the SDGs. You have mentioned the fact that the situation has become more dire on account of the global pandemic. But again, I think that it is an opportunity, as you have mentioned, for us to be more robust, to work together, to strengthen existing systems and put in place policies that would address the whole gamut of the challenges we are facing regarding the SDGs. So it gives me pleasure, therefore, to work with ESCAP and UNDP to provide this platform that we are providing to parliaments in your region so that they can get information. I was pleased to hear Charles mention the lineup of speakers during this webinar, where there will be up-to-date information on the SDG processes in the region and how parliaments can best contribute to giving greater impetus to the implementation of the SDGs. You can be certain that the IP will continue to promote the implementation of the SDGs because it is part of its strategic priorities. And in fact, all of our strategy is built around the SDGs, building what you call resilient societies, AMIDA, building accountable, representative, and accessible institutions of parliament that can contribute to delivering on the expectations of the people. And that is why platforms such as the one we're having today, the second in the region, I think in the within a space of what, 1 or 2 months. I remember the last time we were on this platform not long ago, AMIDA, and we're conveying the same message that let's use the pandemic and the challenges inherent in the pandemic as an opportunity to do better, to not return to business as usual, but to work and strive for greater impact that is inclusive. Inclusive, I would like to borrow that word from you, AMIDA. What we need to do is to be sure that whatever we're doing in implementation of the SDGs is inclusive of all of society. No one will have to be left behind. And who else, apart from parliamentarians, are legitimately duty-bound to ensure inclusiveness because they are elected to represent all of society. And so I offer our continued support to strengthening the capacities of parliaments, to providing the resources and tools that such platforms as the one we are launching today will provide in order for them to do their work in a more effective and efficient manner. So thank you very much for the opportunity to share this message with you this morning. I look forward to the outcome of these proceedings, and I dare to believe that this is not the last of our joint endeavors in support of the SDGs that need a lot of our boosting capacity. Thank you very much, AMIDA. Thank you, honorable members of parliament, for attending this meeting. And of course, Charles, great to see you again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretary General, for those words. I think honourable members and staff of parliaments, UNDP colleagues and others who are participating, you know, what we've had is a very powerful scene setting. We've heard from both the Executive Secretary and the Secretary General about just how important, especially at this time of recovery from COVID, the role of parliamentarians is in making sure that we don't lose this historic opportunity to recommit to the 2030 agenda and its 17 sustainable development goals. I think just so that there's some sort of context to this event, what will happen at the end of the discussion is that we'll sum up the key messages, and Martin will present those at the UN ESCAP SDG Summit next month, which will be reviewing regional progress to just indicate how we can get back on track, and that valuable reminder from the Executive Secretary just now about how we're not on track and how we really must all pull together to do that, I think is a great way to start our substantive discussion. As I indicated at the outset, we have a presentation on data, so important for all the evidence-based argument that is required and all the advocacy needed in this area. That will be followed by a presentation from the United Nations Environment Programme expert on how parliaments can ensure that this vital building forward better phase can be done in a way that is environmentally and otherwise sustainable, that doesn't, in the words of nation, from and it will be Ms. Alexandra. She will talk about experiences from this voluntary national review process that Amida mentioned, the vital voluntary reporting that countries engage in on the SDGs, and just how important it is to systematize the role of parliaments in that process. We'll also hear from learned experts from parliaments themselves, and obviously get your observations as we go. So let me not take further time. If Mr. Jan Smit is available now, I'd like to ask him to take over, share the screen, because I believe you have a presentation, and tell us what you feel we need to know on the statistical and data front, to set the scene for this first substantive discussion. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Yes, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
All right. So as Ibu Amida was saying just now, the 2020 issue of the Asia and the Pacific SDG Progress Report was launched this morning, and what I will be talking about is some of the highlights of the report. Why is it important to assess SDG progress? It's a challenging job. There are, as you know, 17 goals and 169 targets, with a total of 231 indicators, plus an awful lot of disaggregations, which begs the question in this among this plethora of data where to start. What we like to do is to get the big picture first, and to ask ourselves two important questions. The first one is, how much progress have we made so far? And then secondly, if we continue business as usual, whether we will achieve our targets by 2030. This chart gives you that big picture. It shows you the distance traveled between 2000 and now on the way to the targets in 2030. If we would be on track, the colored bars would cross the 2020 line here. And as you see, that is not the case for any of the goals. So the region fell short of its 2020 milestone for the SDGs, and that's so even before the global COVID-19 pandemic hit. On its current trajectory, less than 10% of the SDG targets are on track to be achieved by 2030. The biggest progress was on good health and well-being, goal 3, and industry, innovation, and infrastructure, goal 9. But as you'll see in a second, even here, challenges remain. The most alarming developments are that the regressing trends on climate action, goal 13, and life below water, where we see that we are moving away from the target rather than going towards them. In this slide, we drill down from the goals onto the targets, the 169 targets, and you see that there are only 11 targets that are on track as of now. They are marked as green on this dashboard. That applies to international poverty. A few of the goal 3 targets, effective learning outcomes under goal 4, some under goal 9, as said earlier, and goal 10. The yellow indicates the targets where progress needs to be accelerated, and to reach the targets by 2030. And you see that I won't single them out. This applies to quite a few of the targets. And the red indicates the indicators for which the trend has to be reversed at the target level. Also, importantly, is the gray color on this dashboard, because those indicate the targets that can not be, for which progress cannot be measured due to a lack of data. Now, on the availability of data, on this slide, you'll see that the trend of data availability is improving, but still poor for quite a few targets. So as of 2020, we have enough data for tracking the region's progress for almost half of the indicators, but for 80 indicators, 80 again out of the 231, we have insufficient data, and for 38 indicators, we have no data at all. Availability is not the same under each goal. However, for the first time this year, this is the 5th time that we do this exercise. There is sufficient data availability for all indicators of goal 7, while for goals 3 and 6, we have at least some data on each indicator. For other goals, however, particularly those that are environment related, we still have many indicators with no or insufficient data. Continuing on this issue of data availability, challenges remain also very much in producing disaggregated data, so that vulnerable populations are identified and no one is left behind. In the Asia-Pacific region, we have disaggregated data only available for 27 of the 231 SDG indicators, so that is just over 10%. If we look at the sub-regional level in Asia-Pacific, we see that progress is generally stagnant or regressing across all of the sub-regions of the region. Very few goals are on track. For the Pacific and for South and Southwest Asia, we don't have any goals on track at all. A large number of goals, we find that progress is stagnant. For life on land, for example, that applies to each of the sub-regions. And we also see that at the sub-regional level, progress is regressing on many of the environment indicators, goals 13 and 14 in particular. I would like to, so what I have shown you so far is what applies at the Asia-Pacific regional level and its sub-regional level. Sub-regional level. We have been asked by many countries whether this exercise could be done at the country level. So also today, together with the launch of the 2021 version of the report, we are launching a new tool, a National SDG Tracker, which allows countries to do this progress tracking exercise with their with their own data. So the National SDG Tracker is a tool for countries to track progress on the SDGs, and it allows countries to add their own data, to use their own national targets, and to visualize progress in a similar way as I have just shown in the previous slides. The regional results that I have shown you and the tools are available on the Asia-Pacific SDG Gateway. So I encourage you to, if you want to know more about progress and the tools, and also if you want to read the report, to visit data.unescap.org. And the results and tools can also be accessed from the Asia-Pacific Knowledge Management Hub, which I suppose in the context of this meeting has come up before. So at knowledgeunasia-pacific.org. That was it, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jan. And it's great to know that there's now this country level tracker launched. We know very much from our programming at UNDP that there's a real demand from governments and MPs to be able to access disaggregated data at the country level. We, for example, just launched in Bangladesh an app that allows MPs to track this data disaggregated down to the level of their constituency. And, you know, I know that's again been a very powerful way of trying to encourage evidence-based debate. Thank you very much for the presentation. I'm sorry you had to rush through what was a lot of rich material. But so delegates know, all this material will be also available, the presentations, on the IPU website after this this webinar. So you will be able to go back and have a look at everything each of the presenters has said. I'd now like to open the floor to members of Parliament and other participants. The first intervener that I have on my list is the Honourable Francisco Benitez from the House of Representatives of the Republic of the Philippines. Francisco, would you like to take the floor for your maximum 2-minute intervention? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me, Charles? Can I do it? Yes, thank you. Fellow parliamentarians, development workers in government, and the private sectors, greetings from the Philippines. I am Francisco Benitez, a member of the House of Representatives of the Philippines and of the Committee on Sustainable Development Goals. As I listened to the latest update of ESCAP on how the Asia-Pacific region is doing with regards to the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, it is actually quite depressing that we are, even prior to the pandemic, already behind and have now been set back in our journey towards creating a better, more sustainable and inclusive world. However, I would like to point out that the Philippines was making significant progress prior to that. Poverty was reduced to 16.7% in 2018 from a high of 23.5% in 2015, translating to 6 million Filipinos taken out of poverty, 4 years ahead of the 2022 target. Unemployment was down to 4.3% in October 2019. And reforms were instituted in agriculture. A comprehensive tax system was in place, resulting in improved fiscal positions, among other gains. But then the pandemic happened. During the past year, the Congress of the Philippines has worked closely with government to ensure that it is able to address the pandemic. We enacted 2 basic pandemic response and stimulus laws, one called Bayanihan 1 and the other Bayanihan 2, to provide the government with much needed funds. And we are now in the process of debating Bayanihan 3, a law that is designed to help government in its recovery program moving forward, assuming that our economy is able to open and our population properly vaccinated. Earlier this year, and it is great to see that there is this tracker now that we can use, the Committee on Sustainable Development Goals approved the bill proposing the creation of a Sustainable Development Goals National Council. This measure is important and timely because we want to make sure that in the process of working to get the economy going again, the government does not forget its commitment.
We have 30 seconds left for your intervention.
30 seconds left.
Yes.
Okay, so only to say then that the new body within our National Economic Development Authority shall track and monitor where we are in terms of the Sustainable Development Goals, and is tasked to present measures moving forward that can make sure that we are rebooting properly with regards to structural reforms, so that we can in fact ensure ideally a catch-up for where we have lagged behind. So I'll stop there, Charles, because I'm out of time. But thank you.
I'm very sorry to press you on time, but I do want to make sure everybody has an opportunity to speak. It is very interesting and very informative to hear about how your Congress has tackled the issue, or how your chamber in particular has tackled the issue in partnership with government on how to actually systemically track progress. And so I know that that's a practice that other members will find useful and informative. So thank you for sharing it. Now we have a little bit of time left for any further comments or contributions on the issue of where we're at in terms of progress, and what mechanisms, tools, and procedures are being put in place in order to track progress and help MPs to understand where we're at and how they can monitor and encourage further progress. So delighted to receive any further requests for interventions on this point. Otherwise, we'll move on to the next expert presenter. All right, thank you, members. We will then hear from our next expert. This segment, as I indicated earlier, will focus on how parliaments can ensure that COVID-19 recovery strategies incorporate the SDG lens. We heard at the outset of this discussion about the dangers that were presented by COVID, the first great setback in human development in 50, 60 years. And so we really have to ensure that we do build forward better. We don't lose sight of the aims of the 2030 agenda, and that in building forward better, we do so sustainably. Many of you will know about the new IPU UNEP publication, Green Approaches to COVID-19 Recovery, a policy note for parliamentarians. So we're going to hear on this topic in some detail now from Mr. Mushtaq Ahmed Memnon, Regional Coordinator for Resource Efficiency for Asia and the Pacific at the United Nations Environment Programme. Dr. Memon has a doctorate degree in environmental and resource economics from Hiroshima University in Japan, a master's degree in national development and project planning from the University of Bradford in the United Kingdom, a postgraduate diploma in transport from Karachi University, and a bachelor's in civil engineering from Mehran University. So he's incredibly well qualified educationally, academically, and in terms of his professional career to give us a briefing on this subject. May I hand the floor to you, Dr. Memon, and if you have a presentation to share, could you take the screen now, please?
Thank you, and thank you, Chair, and good afternoon or good morning, Excellencies. So let me please share my screen. Okay, so I think everyone can see that. So basically, we'll be looking on the green approaches to the COVID-19 recovery, what we call the green recovery, or building back better, or moving forward better. So depending how the different phrases are there, but the more important point is that when stimulus packages are in place, are coming in place, as we see, that Parliament has the biggest role in approving all those stimulus packages. Even we recently saw the US one. So that's where my entry point will be, that how parliamentarians can help to ensure that we are building back better, or we are moving forward better. So this will be the sort of my brief talk today. And thanks to the presentation from Jan, which I quickly also put that to showcase that how we relate that why we are not yet on the track for SDGs. And because SDGs basically cover all the major challenges, including the climate, including the marine, land, and so on, poverty, food, you name it. So SDGs cover everything, and that's where where we are talking about how stimulus packages can help to bring the economies back on the track, but also help the SDGs or to achieve all the goals in that. So we have all the list now, thanks to the ESCAP, that everything is in picture, that where we are lacking and how we can use our stimulus packages to build better. So basically, as from the United Nations Environment Program, we just had a UN Environment Assembly, and where the decision was taken on the next medium-term strategy, and that focuses on the 3 planetary crises: climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution, again, all part of the SDGs, Paris Agreement, and so on. So basically, how we look on the links between the COVID-19 and the degradation of the environment on the one hand, and also how we link the stimulus packages to reduce the degradation or building back better. So that's basically is how we are looking at what spending we have in our kitty and whether it's sufficient, how we scale up that one, also use it as a seed funding to attract the additional private sector funding, and so on. So that's basically the where the many governments are looking at that when they are reopening their economies, how they reopen the economies. So how they address the plastic issues, the pollution issues, how they address the climate change issues when they are reopening their economies, and so on. So that's where we see that a lot of investments are coming from the public sector as well as from the private sector. But again, the public sector, where the parliamentarians are going to take the decisions, they attract the private sector investments. So some of the key areas which we note from the these 3 planetary boundaries: climate change, pollution, and a loss of biodiversity, as well as if you put those in the SDGs, that some of the key approaches for investment for stimulus packages is coming up as a green infrastructure. As we have seen in all the SDGs, that where we are lacking is the infrastructure challenges for that. Then waste management, because the pollution, we have seen a lot is a challenge with the pollution, but also we have seen the depletion of the resources as we are over consuming our resources and over polluting our resources. So in both ways, we are depleting our resources. So circularity or bringing back the resources in the same loop is required. Then also the energy is becoming a biggest challenge, as we have seen on the one hand that we are having a lot of issues still in many developing countries on the energy shortages itself, even within the current infrastructure and so on. So on the one hand, we have to fill the gap of the energy, and on the other hand, most of the energy is fossil fuel based with a lot of emissions and pollution, affecting again our resources, affecting the public health, again affecting the biodiversity, creating a lot of disasters and so on. So how we can move from the conventional to the clean energy and also to the energy efficiency and so on. And then also as the stimulus package, the biggest objective is always jobs, that how we create the jobs. And when we look on the green investments, the green jobs is becoming quite a good way out. That's a win-win situation, that on the one hand, we are creating the new jobs, whether it be in a green infrastructure, green energy, green circularity, and so on. And then also looking in the investments in the biodiversity and nature-based solutions. As we have seen, a lot of investments in the reforestations are going on, a lot of investments in the marine ecosystem, mountain ecosystems, and so on. And on the top, which again comes as one of the biggest parliamentary role, is the rule of law, that how the environmental law can take place, its implementation, as many countries are parties to the international conventions and so on. And so there's a lot of new regulations, whether it be on the plastics, whether it be on the renewable energy and so on, are coming up. So again, on the one hand, parliamentarian is working on the stimulus packages approvals, but also they are working on the new regulations, new laws pertaining to these three planetary challenges. So that's where the UNEP is working with ESCAP and other partners through this Inter-Parliamentary Union, that how we can help or assist in legislative action, in budgetary action, and also in oversight action. So how the public investments can go into the green infrastructure through proper legislation, other tax rebates or waivers are coming up for the recycling, for the circularity, for sustainable lifestyles and so on. So how to create the new incentives for the green jobs at the micro level as well as the macro level in the different sectors, whether it be the agriculture sector, infrastructure, transport, you name it. And also the tourism, which has got hardest hit. Now, when we are opening up for the tourism, how the investments in green tourism can help on the green jobs, but also to keep our planet healthy for increased tourism. And then also coming the green procurement, public procurement. So again, public procurement takes a lot of like our GDP in the most of the developing countries in the range of 30% and plus. So how we can make this public procurement green, how we can ensure that based on the life cycle assessments, whatever we are procuring, it's helping rather than damaging the environment or our resources or the resources for the future generations. And then extended producer responsibility, pollution pay principles, different regulations, how they are being enacted through the parliament and so on. Then subsidies, how we are reducing the subsidies, and then also how we are regulating different drivers and so on. So this is one of the very important areas where we are really helping or supporting the parliaments, or even so-called the green parliaments, like the green judiciary and so on. And then also the parliamentarians have a role to oversee, to ensure that government actions are in proper way and so on. So it's not only they approve the legislation, but they should also have a role in the oversee or ensure. And then also they have a role on the budget. So legislation, oversee, and the budgets. The parliament has a much, much bigger role. And with this COVID-19, which is a sort of a blessing in disguise, that parliaments are becoming more visible in terms of the green recovery using all these three areas. So finally, I just want to cite a few examples, like Pakistan has put USD $47 million in reforestation, and this was picked up World Economic Forum and so on, that how the green jobs was created in the ecosystem restoration and so on. Then Australia also around $47.2 million in environmental measures for the COVID-19 relief and recovery fund. Then the Republic of Korea has introduced a new Green Deal, and same like Japan and China and other countries. And that's where Republic of Korea has put 53.6 billion to the green investments to achieve the carbon neutrality by 2050. So with that, I would like to thank again all the excellencies and the chair. So back to chairs, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Memon, for that compelling presentation. I think participants in the webinar will see, as they know already from their daily work as members of a parliamentary institution, just how important engaging now on this opportunity to build forward better really is. Now we have a request for participation from Wei LV. Yes, I'm sorry if I've not got your name correct, but please introduce yourself and make your intervention.
Honorable Secretary General, Mr. Chun Gong, my name is Liu Wei. I'm the member of the Economic and Financial Affairs Committee of the National People's Congress of China. It is my great honor to attend this webinar with you. Due to the limited time, I would like to brief you on China's institutions and measures on COVID-19 prevention and control and economic and social development. In 2020, China has put people's life and health first, and we spared no effort on COVID-19 response. Thus, we made great achievements at reasonable cost. In around 2 months, the daily increase in domestic coronavirus cases had fallen to single digits. Also, we have achieved growth in economy and growth in import and export. During the pandemic, we have increased our budgetal deficit and used 2 trillion RMB to reach local communities directly to ensure the livelihood of enterprises, people, and communities. And we offered to 8 million people countering temporary difficulties with subsidies. The government is actively implementing the Agenda 2030, and we have put forth that we're going to fight against poverty, financial risk, and pollution. In 2020, the fight against extreme poverty has come to an end, and we have met the target set out in the agenda 10 years ahead of schedule. In
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I'm very sorry.
Output has
Very
exceeded
sorry to interrupt.
600 million tons.
Thank you very much for that intervention. In the last minute, because we only have 2 minutes per intervention, could you possibly address the role of the Parliament in this important area? Because we have that is obviously the focus of the webinar. Thank you, Honourable Member.
Okay, I will take this time to introduce the role played by the National People's Congress. During the COVID-19, the NPC has formulated legislations on agriculture, rural areas, and people, and we conducted session of the 13th National People's Congress has just been closed, and we have put forth 25 indicators, including on economy, green development, people's livelihood, innovation, and security. Especially, we initiated that by 2030, our carbon dioxide emission will peak by then. This will make detailed plans for how we'll peak our carbon dioxide emission by 2030. And this is what I would like to say today. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the informative and helpful intervention from the Honourable Member on behalf of the National People's Congress. And I apologise that I interrupted you because of the shortness of time. We now have an intervention from Mr. Siha from the Indonesian Parliament. Mr. Siha, may I call on you now to deliver your 2-minute remarks? Thank you, and I will keep you to time.
All right, good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Fellow member of parliaments from the Asia-Pacific region, distinguished participants of the good afternoon to you all. Thank you for the presentation, Mr. Memon. It's very timely and very informative. So from our end in Indonesia, what we've done in the last 12 months, that the parliaments approved 2 major regulations concerning the COVID-19. One is about the financial policy and the financial system stability, which relaxes the state budget deficits and provides much needed fiscal. Secondly, we also we have a national economic recovery plan which in 2021, we plan to allocate about $47 billion to help stabilize the economy and help the poor in our country. Consequently, we also have to focus on the green economy as well, because majority of our people works in the agriculture, and this is one sector that remains positive during COVID. So consequently, logically, that's the one area that we have to strengthen. Now, as for the green economy, we also have a policy to promote biodiesel 30. So 30% of the fuel contain the biodiesels, and working on total 100% bioenergy. That's one initiative that's already going on and will be pushing forward in near future. At the same time, we also want to have a clean environment, good environment, without sacrificing the livelihood and of our people. That's our experience in Indonesia. Thank you.
Thank you for the intervention and for sharing that experience. I now call on Mr. Kamran Bayramov from the Parliament of Azerbaijan. Please address your remarks, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, thank you for organizing such a topical event, which is devoted to such a topical issue at current days. We all know that COVID-19 pandemic is posing threats not only to human health and life, but also to people's socio-economic well-being and country's economic growth. I don't want to take much of your time regarding the experience of my country, but I would like to adopt necessary laws to assist their responsive governments, of course, in mitigating and tackling COVID-19 and its adverse impacts. I'm missing the plenary session of my parliament. Today, our parliament hears annual report of the government on the work done for 2020, and of course, the implementation of sustainable development goals and fight against COVID-19 is the most vulnerable issue, and some parts of the report are devoted to this issue. And anyway, parliaments can oversee the expenditure of the public funds related to COVID-19, and it's crucial to ensure that the funds are allocated properly and all individuals receive fair distribution of the benefits of COVID-19 containment measures. And I think it's very important, because we should avoid such negative things like huge unemployment and loss of income, because this is the basic visible issues of the current pandemic, as well as poverty. It could impede people to access basic services due to unaffordability, and we should be cautious, as the pandemic could worsen inequality and inequity among citizens as well as countries. This is just a brief intervention, brief opinion. I think I can present more detailed speech to organize later. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Bayramov, and thank you for participating in this forum and giving your views, and for missing a very important reporting session on the part of the government in order to do so. We certainly appreciate it. Our final intervener in this section is Nausheen Hamid from the National Assembly of Pakistan. Dr. Hamid, you have the floor for 2 minutes. Thank you very much. Please unmute Dr. Hamid and we'll be able to hear from you.
You can hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Yes, okay. Now, as we have seen that during the COVID-19, many countries have paused the childhood vaccination programs, health services for cancer screening, family planning, and on non-COVID-19 infectious diseases. In Pakistan, due to timely measures taken by the government in collaboration with provinces, the outbreak has so far been prevented from getting worse. The government has constituted a high-level national coordination committee headed by the Prime Minister that evaluates the evolving situation on day-to-day basis to effectively curb the spread of virus in the country. The National Disaster Management Authority and the Ministry of National Health Services, Regulation and Coordination have leading roles in combating the spread of pandemic. A command and control center has also been established to ensure the effective coordination among the federal and provincial governments to control COVID-19. National Coordination Committee formulates and implements a comprehensive strategy to stop the transmission of virus and mitigate its consequences. The NCC established the National Command and Coordination Center to synergize and articulate a unified national effort to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic and to implement the NCC's decision. And it has also designated the Disaster Management Agency as leading operational agency. So in each province, the chief ministers have convened task forces to coordinate the response with the provincial disaster management agencies as the leading provincial operational agencies. Furthermore, the Emergency Operations Center at the National Institute of Health has been activated. A technical group with 3 subcommittees for risk communication and community engagement, supply, cold chain, and vaccine logistic and surveillance with the adverse event following immunization have been established at the Federal Expanded Program of Immunization. Moreover, the government of Pakistan has launched the ESAS Emergency Cash Program, which is a social protection program initiative that started on 9th April and has reached about 14.8 million people. The National Vaccine Deployment Plan, as well as the prioritization of eligible population and application for the COVAX vaccine in general, and recently the Pfizer vaccine for use in the first wave of vaccination were approved by the National Immunization Technical Advisory Committee.
And Dr.
So
Hamid, sorry, we're close to time. And if you want to talk at all about the role of Parliament in all of this, we'd be delighted to hear from you on that.
Finally, I would just like to say that the Parliament is overseeing all these actions, and these committees are headed by the parliamentarians and the Minister for Planning. So the Parliament is on board with all the decisions, and all these things are discussed in the Parliament, and then they're taken forward to these platforms, and the ministers are involved in it. The parliamentarians, they are directly overseeing all the steps taken for these pandemic issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hamid, and I apologize I interrupted you, but it was great to understand that in Pakistan there's a, if you like, a hybrid approach to accountability, if I understood you correctly, where members of Parliament and members of the executive are sitting on these oversight committees together to have a look at the efficiency of implementation of vital things like vaccine delivery. So thank you very much for your intervention and for sharing that experience. Honourable members, thank you. Honourable members and other participants, I realise this is a bit of a gallop through material, but because of the relatively limited time, we're now going to move to the final substantive section of today's webinar. As I indicated, this section is facilitated by an expert from the Inter-Parliamentary Union, our colleague, Dr. Blagojevich. Alexandra manages the international development work of the Inter-Parliamentary Union. This includes SDGs, health and climate change. She holds an MA in International Studies from the University of Denver, and she's going to talk specially about voluntary national reviews, this key process to monitoring the achievement of the SDGs at the national level, strengthening national ownership of and building more political support for the SDGs. So the aim of this section is to present to you all a very valuable survey that the IPU conducted earlier in the year. I believe in conjunction with the high-level political forum at which these VNRs are actually presented to the international community. And Alex has just put a link to that survey that she's going to talk to now in the chat box, so you can download it and have a look at it yourselves, perhaps follow it while she makes her presentation. But I think, you know, really getting parliamentarians involved systematically in all aspects of the SDG process, not just in the oversight committees that you sit on, not just debating legislation, not just representing your constituents, not just thinking about the budget, but also getting involved in these international processes, making sure that you're members of delegations to New York to present either via Zoom or in person the findings of the VNR, making sure that the VNR is debated in the committees of the Parliament and then in the plenary itself, and making sure that Parliament is consulted along with civil society and other stakeholders on the production of the VNR, so that it is a whole of nation approach rather than just a government report, is so important. Anyway, without further interventions from me, let us hear from Alex. We're then going to hear from Mr. Saidov, one of the vice presidents of the IPU Executive Committee and a senior member of Parliament from Uzbekistan, who will comment on some of the findings that the IPU survey shows us. We'll then open the floor, as we did before, for 2-minute interventions from members and others. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you very much, Charles. Dear members of Parliament, ladies and gentlemen, my presentation will be shared with you through the IPU website, and I have also pasted a link to the report that I will present here. So in the interest of time, I may not go through every slide in detail, but you will have an opportunity to read more should you be interested in the findings of the survey. So basically, maybe to start with what is the VNR? The VNR is a voluntary process which happens every year, through which governments voluntarily report their progress on the SDGs to the United Nations high-level political forum on sustainable development. So the process is meant to be inclusive. It's usually started by the government, but the idea is that different segments of society, different sectors, different institutions be involved and consulted and provide contribution, including parliaments. So as the IPU, what we have done since the beginning of this process is we have tracked the parliamentary participation in this process. And we have some interesting conclusions to share. So let me maybe start with my presentation then. The rationale, as I said, of the VNR is in general for the United Nations and all the countries that have committed to the SDGs is to share good practices, to create some sort of an accountability mechanism at the United Nations level and promote national ownership of the SDGs. For us at the IPU, we are interested in seeing how parliamentary oversight and more generally parliamentary engagement plays its part, and to see how strong the political will is in Parliament to engage in this process. So in 2020, which is the year that the report focuses on, we had 11 members from the ESCAP region that volunteered to present their reports to the United Nations. This year in 2021, there'll be 12. And you can see here exactly what countries there are. And I'm very pleased to see that quite a few parliamentarians from some of these countries are here. So the IPU survey itself, very briefly, we had two main questions trying to understand the level of engagement and the nature of that engagement from Parliament, followed by some sub-questions. We worked through the IPU structures in parliaments and conducted the survey last year between May and June just before the UN high-level political forum. So let me share with you our findings. So basically in 2020, 47 countries in total volunteered to submit the report to the high-level political forum. Only 45 did at the end. Of course, there was COVID, but so it is still good that only 2 didn't manage to do it. So in terms of our participation in our survey, 26 parliaments sent us the responses, which represents 55% of participation of parliaments in the IPU survey, which is better than what we had in 2019, which was 49%. So we asked a question of parliaments if they were able to provide some sort of involvement or to engage in some sort of involvement in the VNRs. And this was an open question without suggesting what form that involvement took. And 58% of them said yes, which in 2019 was 38. So this is another good progress that we can report. Then we wanted to understand a little bit of the how, in what way did parliaments contribute? So we will now focus on those parliaments that responded directly to the IPU. So out of 26, as you can see, 19 parliaments said that they were informed, but they did not necessarily take part in the process itself. 13 said that they were presented also with the government plan on how to engage Parliament and what specific contribution was needed. Different stages of involvement. You see most parliaments were consulted or informed before the first draft of the report was presented, and then the participation gradually decreases as the process proceeds, and only 3 parliaments were involved in all 3 stages. In terms of actual input, well, we see that there is here 14 parliaments that they say that they feel that they have provided actual input, but there are still 12, so it's more like 50-50 that said that they didn't feel that they provided actual input. And we think that this is because there can be different factors, of course, but maybe a little bit of a lack of openness on the part of the government, perhaps a poor timing for the parliament to engage, and maybe even lack of sufficient capacity in parliament to provide input. Now you see, in terms of input modalities, the numbers go down. If we talk about very concrete ways in which parliaments engage, like hearings in committees, question time, and so on, we are really talking about very few parliaments that actually took action in this regard. And only 2 parliaments out of 26 reported having engaged in all these different ways. So I will skip the next one. And just to say that at the end, most of those parliaments that have responded to the IPU survey, they said, well, regardless of the way in which we contributed or got involved, we more or less agree with what the government presented, and we believe that this represents a fair assessment of where we are with our SDG progress. So my final slide is about some of the conclusions that we draw from this. First of all, from the findings of the survey, we see that that quality and depth of parliamentary engagement needs to improve. The parliaments get informed more and more, but there should be a little bit more quality in terms of how they engage and provide input. And then there seems to be still some reluctance on the part of governments to involve parliaments. From the VNR process itself, we need to see a little bit in terms of how we run this survey to coordinate better with the VNRs themselves. And of course, aim to have the participation rate at 100%. So I really encourage all of you who come from parliaments whose countries are presenting the VNR survey this year, first of all, to get engaged, absolutely, and then to also report to the IPU on your findings. So I'll stop here and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alexandra. And as noted, these presentations will be available on the IPU website after this webinar, but Alex has also provided the link to the document itself, so you can scroll through at your leisure. We also have an update from my colleague Ricardo at ESCAP, who's just indicated that Pakistan has advised the Economic and Social Council that this year they won't in fact be in the present conditions post-COVID presenting a VNR. So it's just an update to what we just heard from Alex. I'm going to call now on two interveners in turn. I want to first address a question to Mr. Akmal Saidov, a senior member of the Parliament of Uzbekistan and somebody that I had the honor to interact with closely on mission last year before, or while it was still possible to actually conduct missions to parliaments and work with them in person. And it was a delight to work with you then, sir. My question is that during the 2020 UN High-Level Political Forum, Uzbekistan presented its first voluntary national review report, and there was significant parliamentary contribution to the report by way of input. Could you perhaps advise participants in this webinar what the key lessons that your parliament learned were through the providing of inputs to the government on the VNR? The floor is yours, sir, after which we will hear from the distinguished participants from Thailand.
Thank you, distinguished moderator, dear Secretary General, distinguished members of the Parliament, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure for me to attend this webinar for the Asia-Pacific region parliaments. I would like to note that the topic of today's event is of global significance, especially during the coronavirus pandemic, which has affected absolutely all countries. You're right, on July 2020, the first voluntary national report of Uzbekistan was presented to an ECOSOC, high-level political forum, on the progress of implementation by the country of 17 SDGs in achieving of 2030 agenda. In response to the fielded question, 5 major outcomes or parliamentary lessons from the process of preparing and submitting voluntary national reviews can be presented as learning points. Firstly, institutional framework for implementing of SDG. Last year, in 2020, a parliamentary commission was established to monitor the implementation of the National Sustainable Development Goals and Targets until 2030. Secondly, legislative framework of the SDGs. Of course, national parliaments play a significant role in the country's development process, being an important tool in achieving the SDGs. Parliamentary development also contributes to achieving the principle of the SDG, leaving no one behind, since parliamentarians represent the very constituents for whose benefit these points were developed. Over the last years, more than 30 laws was adopted by Uzbek parliament in the field of social development. Secondly, the Uzbek parliament was ratified more than 10 international treaties, including 4 conventions of ILO. Thirdly, parliamentary monitoring of the implementation of the SDGs. The parliament, together with the UN agencies in Uzbekistan, launched a decade of actions and commitments to achieve of SDGs in Uzbekistan. And fourthly, information for and educational activities in the field of SDG. In order to increase the awareness of parliamentarians on the SDG, the handbook of the Inter-Parliamentary Union, Parliaments and the Sustainable Development Goals, a self-assessment toolkit was published in Uzbek language and disseminated among the parliamentarians. And fifthly, international cooperation in the field of SDGs. Over the past year, with the participation of high representatives of UN agencies, including ILO, WHO, UNESCO, UNDP, and others, also with the Inter-Parliamentary Union, 2 cycles of global discussions were held in a virtual format dedicated to the implementation of the SDG in the framework of the international initiative of the Secretary General UN, Antonio Guterres, United Nations 75. We should think about developing a new model of parliamentary development, including the principles of parliament and human rights. The parliament, being the heart of democratic governance, should always guard the rights and interests of citizens, voters, and civil society. I should say that in a current year's report of Bertelsmann Foundation from Germany, Uzbekistan ranked 66 among the 193 countries in achieving the indicators of Sustainable Development Goals. And I have 2 information and suggestions. The first, this year we are planning to hold a forum in Bukhara on the topic parliamentary global cooperation in achieving Sustainable Development Goals. And second, it's also planned to hold the Tashkent SDG 16 non-governmental forum. The forum will be held tentatively from the June 16 to June 18, 2021. It is expected that the results of the forum will be presented at the United Nations high-level political forum, which will be held from 6 and 15 July 2021. I invited all of today's participants to these events in Uzbekistan. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Saidov, for that very comprehensive and compelling presentation with 5 concrete suggestions on how Parliament can really interact very powerfully with the government on SDG monitoring and cooperation. And it's great to know that you've made use of the IPU UNDP toolkit, that it's been translated and is being used by your institution. I know that we're about to hear from Thailand, who's also made a translation of that document and is thinking about how best to use it inside its own National Assembly. I'm also aware of the efforts of your Parliament and your government to sponsor an international resolution for the General Assembly on the role of parliaments in really achieving the SDGs. And it's been an honor to be involved on the sidelines of providing some technical assistance with that. And I wish you and the government all the best in that endeavor. Without further ado, let me call on what I suspect will be the final parliamentary intervention in today's webinar. Professor Krasid from the National Assembly of Thailand, the floor is yours. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Chao. Honorable member of the IPU, Thailand has put great emphasis on the monitoring of the implementation of SDG. In this regard, we have subcommission on SDG monitoring for the implementation in Thailand. We frequently...
Professor, sorry, may I ask that you perhaps just go a little bit closer to the microphone because the volume is somewhat faint. Thank you.
Okay. Could you hear me well?
That's great. Yes.
I just would like to start with, we emphasize a lot on reporting system. We invite all stakeholders to come and report to subcommission on SDG implementation every 2 weeks, including the Secretary of the National SDG Committee, representative from Foreign Affairs, private sector, university, and also the ministry that almost involved in SDG. So we have mechanism to monitor and oversee. At the same time, we also raise awareness among parliamentary members so that they will support and facilitate the act or bill for achieving SDG. Regarding voluntary the national review, this year, Ministry of Foreign Affairs has preparing and almost finished. They will report to us first, and we will get some feedback from us. At the same time, the Secretariat of National Committee work at National Economic and Social Development Council. We also presented at the meeting. So we will try to make a report very comprehensive. And this report is going on. And the process of reviewing, we have chance to feedback to all stakeholders involved, including ministry and also private sector. Just for your information, in the year 2019, Thailand get SDG index 73 score. And Thailand is ranking number 40 out of 162 countries and number 1 in ASEAN. So hopefully these experiences that we have national mechanism for implementation and for report preparation. At the same time, we also have parliamentary experiences in oversee, engage, and also follow up or monitor the whole process, and also feedback, suggestion for further improvement. Finally, I am pleased that UN system now develop so-called SDG Tracker 2. I think this will help to standardize for reviewing the status of SDG in member countries. And Thailand also wish to share and learn from other country experiences. Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Thank you, Professor. And may I thank you particularly for being so careful to concentrate on the role of Parliament from your point of view in the Senate on SDG achievement, because of course that is the very sort of experience that we do want to share in this webinar. Honourable members, it's now 27 minutes past 3. I think, although I've probably been a bit tough on the time, I have tried to make sure that we do stick to the topic and that we do manage to finish before the Zoom call gets cut off in a couple of minutes. What I just want to do, if I may, with your leave, is summarize what I think the key messages from today's discussion have been, because as I indicated, Martin Chungong, the Secretary General of the Inter-Parliamentary Union, will present these findings to the next high-level meeting of the United Nations Economic and Social Commission on Asia and the Pacific later this month, I believe, or perhaps early next month, on SDG progress. So the parliamentary aspect will be represented thanks to IPU, UNDP, ESCAP, and you as participants today providing your inputs. So I think the first point was that SDGs are a compass that need to lead us through the COVID recovery. Our focus must be, as parliamentarians and those who support MPs, on an inclusive, resilient and sustainable recovery across the board, not going back to the old, tired, polluting, unsustainable ways of working, but using this as an opportunity for a new departure, to do things differently in some of the ways that we've heard. Asia-Pacific, like all regions, is behind on the SDGs. We heard this right up front from the Under-Secretary General. The goals are off track, and with COVID-19, the overlapping crises of inequality and climate are providing what could be a fatal hit to the SDGs if we're not all careful in recommitting in our respective spheres of influence and activity to their achievement. So it's not the time to slow down or give up. If we're not focused on the SDGs before, we have to be focused on them now. And the interventions of today show that parliaments often in partnership with governments and other parts of society, need to take steps to make sure that their countries follow the shared compass of the global goals as we all recover from the crisis. Digital tools for data collection, like this excellent country-focused tracker that Jan Smit introduced in his presentation, are going to be helpful to assess where we are on each goal and track progress as we go forward, adopt those evidence-based arguments for advocacy that are so important and compelling. And we've seen, as I think I mentioned, how parliaments can adapt these tools. In Bangladesh, we've worked with the parliament to produce an app that disaggregates this data right down to the level of the constituency, so the MPs can actually see just what's happening on the ground on maternal mortality, on school building, on what have you, and make arguments to make sure that their constituencies are well resourced as required. These are the tools that we can all use to help us maintain a focus on the entirety of the 2030 agenda and its interlinked social, environmental, and economic sustainability priorities that have to inform recovery from the crisis. And I think what you've shown today as parliamentarians is a growing understanding that the take, make, use, lose industrial model hasn't only put people in precarious positions, but it's depleted the planet's finite resources and dumped waste into the environment, let alone preventing us from focusing on key issues like the universal right to health. So COVID does present an opportunity as we build forward better to do things differently. And you've told us how we can do things differently. Partnerships between parliaments and governments in places as diverse as Pakistan and the Philippines, Thailand, to champion an effective and accountable COVID response, but also to take very concrete structural reforms to make sure that the economy reboots in a way that keeps the country on track for the SDGs is important. Uzbekistan has shown us some concrete ways to partner with the government on the VNR process, and I think these are really valuable ones that we can all share and have a think about adopting in our particular national economies and jurisdictions. There's no doubt that greater engagement of parliaments, civil society, the private sector, academics, parliaments, the judiciary, and the executive branch, all of these entities are required if we're going to have any hope of reaching the 2030 goals over the next 9 years. So here's a real opportunity. Thanks to the IPU, thanks to all of you, thanks to ESCAP, because we all know that prior to COVID, there was a crisis in institutional, democratic, representative governments. People were giving up on parliaments and traditional ways of interacting with government. They were losing faith. We have a real opportunity as we build forward better to restore people's faith. We can show them that we're listening. We can show them that we're taking their interests into account and trying to leave no one behind as we do build forward better. And I hope that the resources that have been shared with you on screen that will be available on the IPU site and that we've also shared links to in the chat box will actually be of help because it's really only through this shared experience that we can move forward together and reach those SDGs. Honourable members, Secretary General, Under Secretary General of the United Nations, key staff of parliamentary institutions and UN organs, thank you very much for your participation today. It's been incredibly valuable. I think everybody will agree, and we look forward to Martin Chungong reporting these findings back at the next high-level meeting on SDGs and to continuing our efforts all together to achieve SDGs in the context of the 2030 agenda and leave no one behind. Thank you again.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Now, I just need to say in closing, the IPU has provided a little feedback form here, evaluating these interventions to make sure that we're doing something useful, and if we're not, to know how we can do something useful is a really important part of our work. So please do take a moment to go through and fill out the feedback form before you leave the seminar. Thank you very much. I'm filling out mine now. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.